New urbanism, have you heard of this thing? It's an urban design movement that promotes environmentally friendly land use. New urbanism is an urban design movement that talks about basically those environmentally friendly habits by creating walkable neighborhoods that have a wide range of housing and job opportunities for the folks that live there. It rose up in the United States back in the early 1980s, and it slowly reached out and influenced a bunch of different areas of real estate development, urban planning, and municipal land use strategies. This new urbanism tries to address the problems that we're seeing with urban sprawl and suburban sprawl in post-Second World War suburban development. This new urbanism is strongly influenced by urban design practices that were popular up until the rise of the car right before World War II. It's got like 10 goals, right? It's got goals like a traditional neighborhood development and transit-oriented development. These ideas are like two concepts. You want to build a sense of community in the development of ecological practices. Now, there's a charter for new urbanism, and it says they're advocating the restructuring of public policy and development practices to support a couple of following principles. That neighborhoods should be diverse in use and in population. That communities should be designed for the pedestrian and transit, as well as using a car. That cities and towns should be shaped by physically defining universally acceptable public spaces and community institutions. That urban places should be framed by architecture and landscape design that celebrate the local history, the climate, the ecology, and building practices. A lot of new urbanists support regional planning for open space like parks, context-appropriate architecture and planning, adequate infrastructure like sporting facilities and libraries and community centers, and the balanced development of jobs and housing. New urbanists believe that their strategies can reduce traffic congestion by encouraging folks like us to ride bikes, walk, or take the train. They also hope that this setup is going to increase the supply of affordable housing and kind of limit the expensive growth of suburban sprawl. Now, up until the mid-20th century, cities were organized and developed around mixed-use walkable neighborhoods. For most of human history, this meant that a city was entirely walkable, a town was entirely walkable. Although with the development of mass transit, the reach of that city extended outward on transit lines, and that allowed for the growth of pedestrian communities like a streetcar suburb. But with the growth of like cheap cars and government subsidies for roads, attention began to shift away from the cities and towards growth that was more focused on the needs of the car instead of the needs of the people. After World War II, urban planning largely centered around the use of municipal zoning ordinances to segregate residential from commercial and industrial development. And instead, it focused on the construction of low-density, single-family detached homes as our standard housing format. And this was aimed for the growing middle class, and it kind of worked for a couple of years when land was cheap and commutes were short. The physical separation of where people live from where they work, shop, and frequently spend their recreational time, along with low housing density that often drastically reduced population density from what used to be normal, well, that made cars mandatory for the practical transportation, and it created our culture of car dependency. This new system of development, with its rigorous separation of uses, popped up after World War II, and it became known as conventional suburban development, or urban sprawl. Most of us now live in suburban communities that were built in the last 50 years, and car use per capita has spiked up. Although new urbanism as an organized movement popped up a little bit later than that, a bunch of activists and thinkers soon started to criticize the modernist planning techniques that were put into practice that would end up putting us all in cars. These ideas behind like new urbanism started in the 1970s and 1980s with urban visions and models, so it's still kind of new. That relationship between new urbanism and sustainability, well, you're talking about promoting passive heating and cooling solutions, the use of locally obtained materials, and in general, culture of permanence. New urbanism is a broad movement that covers a bunch of different disciplines and geographic scales. And while the conventional approach remains like really kind of dominant, we're still living in the suburbs, new urbanist principles have become increasingly influential in the fields of planning and architecture and public policy around the world, even in Europe, in America, in Africa. Think about mixed-use streetscapes with corner shops and front porches. The neighborhood is discernible center. This is often like a public square or a green, or sometimes busy or memorable street corner. A transit stop could be located at this center for people to get around. A bunch of the homes are going to be within a 5-minute walk of the center, an average of about a quarter mile to walk. Pretty easy. There's a mix of home types, usually houses and row homes and apartments, so that younger and older people, singles and families, the poor and the wealthy, they can all easily kind of find a place to live. And at the edge of the neighborhood, There are shops and offices of different types that support all of your weekly needs. You just go to a corner store to go shopping. You usually have like a small building or a garage apartment that's allowed in the backyard of each house. It can be used as a rental unit or a place to work, for like offices or for a craft workshop. An elementary school is close enough so that most children can walk from their home. You end up with small playgrounds near every home, not more than like 1/10 of a mile away, so you can easily walk there with a kid. Streets within that neighborhood form a connected network, and that kind of disperses traffic with a bunch of different pedestrian and vehicle routes to any different destination you want to go to. The streets are usually pretty narrow and shaded by rows of trees. This slows traffic and creates an environment that's suitable for pedestrians and bicycles. Buildings in the neighborhood, they're placed close to the center of the street, so you get like a well-defined outdoor room. Parking lots and garage doors rarely front the street. Parking is really stuck in the back of the building, and you can access and park by a car. All of these different modes of getting around kind of change how a city's set up, but it creates like a main street for people to live in. What do you think?